I'm Frank Vaughn. It's September 30th, 2024, and I want to talk about reconciliation, truth, and I want to talk about them in that order. I am living proof of reconciliation. In my veins flows the blood of my English, my French, and my Native American forebears. And new life for this nation and for its heritage can only come out of true reconciling with each other. All the politicians who stand on the world stage and on the Canadian national stage and say all the slogans and do all the virtue signaling have been importing cultures that do not care about the Native American legacy, do not care about our shared history. And if in 100 years we do not change course, they will sweep us all aside, and everything that we are arguing over now will be but a footnote in history. None of us will be remembered. Our collective culture is being swept aside, and division is endlessly being sown among those who have lived on this soil the longest. There is an existential threat that we all share if conflict is all that we can achieve. Now, we can argue about the truth, and there's a lot of truth. There is no point arguing that the residential schools were not harmful, that they were not callous, that many of them were run by people who were evil. As in modern times, private schools and different institutions are run by evil people. Bad things happened, and that is something that is part of our shared history. But in order to move forward, in order to actually get over it and protect what remains, we have to be honest with each other, and we have to tell the full truth, and that is that if mass immigration continues, there will be nothing left of that shared heritage which I alluded to. Now, we can get lost in the nitty-gritty. It is important that when narratives are created, they are substantiated by evidence. We should absolutely investigate the anomalies which have not been investigated. We still don't have a single recovered corpse that has created this entire mythos. But that does not in any way dismiss what really went on in residential schools, the harms that were visited. But in the midst of waves of immigration that are diluting collective Canadian culture, what is more important, focusing on the past or focusing on the present, which is being destroyed by those who want you to focus exclusively on the past? Now, we can talk about the fullness of truth. We can talk about the English and how they traded whiskey with my Native American forefathers, a whiskey that, when combined with their unique genealogy, turned them violent, turned off their inhibitions, and then at the same time traded guns and made the situation much worse. We can talk about the French, who saw what the English were doing through their whiskey and their guns and outlawed the trading of whiskey with the Canadian native population. It wasn't even Canada at the time. They tried to save the Native American from easy exploitation, because just as much as the English were willing to trade, the natives that were here were willing to take. And they took into themselves a poison which divided their society, which divided our society. But there was already a brutality that existed in Native American life. When bands went to war with each other, the women and the children were taken into slavery, and what braves survived the battle were tortured for days in gruesome celebrations that when the French, who seen the exploitation in Europe and seen the violence of Europe, were appalled at the violence of the Native Americans that they encountered here. And they wanted to intervene to try and stop that aberrant cruelty. That's part of the truth. That's part of the whole story. Now, we can parse that, and I think that we should. I think we should have possession of all the facts. We should weigh each and every single one on the scales of history. But at the same time, in this very moment, we are all collectively, our heritage and our legacy, being swept aside. 1 million new Canadians per year. That's how many people are being let into the country. Do the math. Well, those of us who descend from the people that were here 40 and 50 years ago argue back and forth about the past. The present is sweeping us all away. So I would really like to see a reconciliation with the moment that we occupy so that we can save the future from what's already gone under the bridge. If we don't do this, we will lose ourselves, and nobody will even remember the argument that we were trying to have. Now, there's a greater truth as well that applies to the moment. It doesn't necessarily have a backwards-looking history. We have to look at the Indian Act, which is a racist act that is still in power, and politicians don't want to address it. I've been saying for a decade that it needs to be repealed and replaced. Do Native Americans need private property rights? I should say Native American Canadians. What's the proper terminology? I don't even know what I'm supposed to call them in these politically correct times. There are tribes, there are peoples on the reserves where the reserve chief lives in a mansion and everybody else lives in squalor. They drive Cadillacs and new vehicles, and they seem to have all the money while everybody else suffers. We still don't have clean water on the reserves in spite of billions and billions of dollars flowing from the federal government to the reserve system, and nothing seems to improve. We want the truth? Let's ask where all that money is going. Who is benefiting from it all? Because it doesn't seem to be your average, everyday Native Canadian. That's a real truth, but we're not going to talk about that. We put on the orange t-shirts, we say the slogans, and we talk about things that are long gone, but we don't talk about the ongoing exploitation and destruction, which we all share a stake in. So if we want to talk truth, let's talk about the present truth. If we want to talk reconciliation, let's talk about what happens if we don't get reconciled with the moment, because we are going to lose everything. They want to have Canada at a population of 100 million by the year 2100. I am not making this up. That is the stated objective. What do we think happens to Native American culture when it is further diluted by another 70 million Canadians? Furthermore, what happens to the culture that cares enough about our legacy to, at the very least, try to rectify it in the moment, to argue about it? We have this back and forth, but there's only 3 cultures in the land that care about that past. The other cultures, the cultures that are set to grow that 100 million, they don't care about you, they don't care about me, they don't care about Canada. There's a whole cottage industry on TikTok and YouTube and on social media where people who don't even live here offer advice on how to exploit us like we are some prostrate woman being repeatedly violated. I've often called Canada a resource colony, but we are being taken advantage of in ways that defy the imagination and maybe the knowledge of the public. We're so much more than a resource colony. We should be so much more than a resource colony. We have being. We have an isness. And we're going to lose it if we keep talking about things that we can't change and start. We have to start focusing on what we can do and with the moment, moving into the future, what exists now, not so much what exists in the past. Is that a conversation worth having? Absolutely. We should have all the details. But in the meantime, we need to tap the brakes on our mutual destruction. And all the virtue signaling politicians who like to go and make speeches and they like to stand there and they like to look good. And every now and again, one of those chiefs with the mansion on the hill and the nice new Cadillac puts a band of feathers on someone's head. It should repulse you. It's all vain virtue signaling, has everything that's broken about about the relationship continues unabated. The Indian Act is still in force and effect. People still don't have water, don't have futures, don't have access, have no power, have no property rights. The exploitation continues, and it's not just by the white man. It's by their own people, their own leadership. We have to have a conversation around the collective truth, the big truth, the whole picture. Instead, we have a NDP MLA, the partners of the Liberal Party, wanting to just outlaw the discussion. That's not going to get anything reconciled. It's probably not going to get the truth. So they talk and they signal about truth and reconciliation. What are their actions really driving us toward? Collective destruction. It's time we get it together. As I said at the beginning of this video, I'm an Englishman, I'm a Frenchman, I'm a Native American by blood. I'm a Canadian. I know what Canada is. I know what our problems are. But every single day we bring in more problems that are not ours. What's it going to be like when one of the provinces breaks away as a Khalistani republic in 70 years? You might think this is insane. None of us that are watching this will be around in 70 years. But our children, whether they're white, whether they're native, or whether there's some other multi-generational ethnicity that's been here and has actually adapted to the culture, they're going to have to clean up the mess. And believe you me, talking about what happened 100 years ago and 200 years ago, not just talking about it, focusing on it, fixating on it, virtue signaling about it, is not going to stop our collective destruction.